I'm so honored by our guest today, this morning, wherever you are. I think for you it's morning, and for me it's getting late. Um, when I started to do these talks, I just wanted to know what happened and what's happening, and I wasn't so much interested in animation studies, but I wanted to know who are those people who do the films I like. And today I'm very, very honored to have somebody who not only did work on most of the films I very much like, but who lived through the time and can tell me what it was to be like a bartender and meeting his first computer. I hope you didn't mention that in any of your talks. I would like to know. That will be my first question. When did you see your first computer? But let's introduce him properly. Let's meet Daniel Peter. Is it correct? What's your middle name?
Stephen is the middle
Stephen,
name.
because on Instagram, you can only be found by Daniel Stephen McCoy. If I try to find you on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia lists, I think, 7 Daniel McCoys, but none of them are you, which is a shame because you should be on the top list, on the top of the list. You started out as a little baby, became somehow acquainted to mathematics, and then went into university, somehow found your way into the Silicon Valley, and then ending up doing something great at a firm we all love and like, the National Aeronautics Space Administration, before going to a minor animation company and spending the rest of your life over there. Is it, or is it almost correct?
Yeah, pretty close.
Because
Recognize it.
recognize, okay, wonderful. Before we start, I have to thank Andrew. He's behind the screens. From Framestore, and he is monitoring us and made it possible to meet in this Zoom room. So I will talk to Daniel as long as I like, and then I would like to ask you some questions. Put them, please, in the question box, not in the chat thing. I have to greet everybody from Austria to Argentina, from wherever in the world you are, in whatever time zone you are. Please have fun and please ask questions. I know the last 2 times I wasn't able to manage that, to handle that, because I'm too shaky and too well. Anyway, I will try to bring you in as most as I can. When did you see your first computer, and why did you or didn't you fell in love with that at that time?
Actually, I hadn't talked about that for a long time. My very first computer, notifications.
Nice to meet you.
When I was in high school, in mathematics class, my math teacher thought, "Oh, these computers are going to be the wave of the future. I just know it." And this is in the late 60s, 1960s. And she managed to get the school district to buy a computer that was a Wang. It was just a glorified programmable calculator. It had these Nixie tube display and a little keyboard, and it would read punch cards that were ones that you could hand punch, had little pop outs you could do, and it had a clamshell reader, so you could do 1 card worth and stick it in, close it, and it would run your program. And she, that was not
very
that didn't make me feel like, oh, I need to do this for the rest of my life.
Okay.
I went off to college and studied philosophy and was a bartender. But then, I decided bar I was working at went out of business, and I was unemployed and thought, well, I had a friend who worked at NASA, and Ames Research is right in Silicon Valley. I grew up in the valley that is Silicon Valley, Santa Clara Valley. And
Okay.
when I was young, it was known more for its orchards. It's some of the best orchard country, cherries, apricots, but they're all
Very healthy.
the orchards are gone now. It's all paved over. But I, when I was young, it was known more for its orchards. Some of the best orchard country, cherries, apricots, they're all the orchards gone now. It's all paved over. But, some of the orchards are gone now. It's all paved over. But Yeah, Silicon Valley happened there. It just started to grow. Stanford's up at one end. It's not too far from UC Berkeley, and there's just a few companies, and NASA being there, and near there was a U.S. Air Force Satellite Test Center, and Lockheed, missiles and space, and there were just all these engineers up there, and that it gradually, IBM put in something there, and the chip manufacturers started up. It was just all booming in the 70s, and we had community colleges. Like I'd been at a full 4-year university and had dropped out. So I went to this community college, just a school that can only offer a 2-year degree, and they do a lot of professional stuff. But they had some computer programming classes in 1976, and they had the first one. I still remember the first one was programming in Fortran. There was a self-paced course where you could go to the library and listen to lectures on tape. Then you could go to the computer lab where you would punch your program onto 80 column cards and hand them to an operator to feed and print out and come back. And I was unemployed at the time, so I just started chewing through the lessons, and I was halfway through the course.
Desperation.
After the first week. It wasn't desperation. It was just I was bored, had nothing else to do. But I ended up finishing a couple of courses in the fall semester, and at the beginning of the year they started an internship program every year with NASA Ames, where students from this community college would go and work at. And I didn't realize when I got it was paid, but it was actually a loan. So they borrowed money. I had to pay it back after I got, but I just got some minimum wage thing for half time work as they called me a data tech. But I ended up with a group there that in the very beginning of 1977, I went in. They had an Evans and Sutherland Picture System 1, which was one of the first interactive graphics, 3D graphics displays. It was a calligraphic scope, vector scope, where your program was controlling the cathode ray beam and sweeping the lines onto the phosphor of the screen. And so you could do 3D wireframes. You couldn't do full color or anything like that. But I was working with interactive graphics almost immediately after one semester's worth of computers. And I was soon learning a lot more at work at NASA than I was at school.
I have to go a little bit, just for a little second. When you was a pupil at school, in our family we had people who my brothers, some of them were quite good at mathematics, and some of us, like me, were not so good at mathematics, but quite good with history and literature. What did you like more when you were little?
I was interested in a lot of things, but I was very good at math. In late high school, my teachers recognized me and started sending me off to mathematics contests, just taking tests for competition. And my favorite, my last year of high school, I had already done all the required mathematics, and the last year in high school was just more, but I didn't need it to graduate. The alpha nerd of the high school had gone off to a mathematics contest and had done very poorly, mainly because he had spent too much time on one question that he couldn't figure out the answer to, and he never got it, and it wasted a bunch of time, and he did poorly, and he was really, really disappointed in that. And he came back and he talked to our class, and the teacher had him put the question up on the blackboard, and then after he spoke, she said, anybody who can figure this out today gets an A for the quarter, passing grade. So she started lecturing about something or other, and I was at the back and I just worked out the problem. When she stopped lecturing, I handed her the question, and she loved it. I was kind of, my last year, I was teenager, I was having trouble focusing on classes and stuff like that. so she kind of liked this somehow. So every quarter she would come up with a really hard problem, put it on the board. I did 4 questions to pass mathematics my last year in high school. It was pretty funny. But I would sit there, I would do math. She'd be lecturing one place, I was working in another part of the book. It was just, I had trouble focusing.
So it's very much up to what teachers do you have at this time?
Yeah, I loved her as a teacher.
Well,
because she saw me, rather than being like, oh, he's not concentrating, she saw, what was there. Anyway, but that, I kind of rebelled when I got out. I went to university, I didn't take any mathematics.
Yeah, that was so amazing, because I thought, yes, he saw the light, and then he went into the real stuff, which is language, history, and all the other things. But before we go into that, I have another question first.
Sure.
If I watch with my nephews and nieces a film, I always have to tell them, now we are going to see a film. There's no computer there. You do not have, story just works because you do not have a mobile phone, something like that. And I have to do some explanation. And for them, it's very hard to imagine a world without all those tools we all take for granted these days. When you grew up, were you already aware that there's a change coming? Or what would you have done if no computer would have been invented? And in the end, I would like to know what it was then to live through this moment where from year to year, things became more and more different than the way you spent your early years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I said, the valley I was in was full of orchards, and one of the possible paths was working in that. They had these canneries that would can the fruit from the orchards, and that was one of the careers you could get locally. And I wasn't one of those kids that knew what I wanted to do to start and had some big dream to chase. I just kind of floated through. And so I had no idea what I was going to do. And then the computer thing which is how I ended up a bartender.
Oh, did your parents have some suggestions?
No, well, occasionally when I was in university, I worked one summer for the U.S. Postal Service as a mail carrier, just delivering mail, while covering for vacations for regular mailmen. And I probably could have stayed on that if I had wanted to do it. And my mother thought that was, this is wonderful. I come from a very modest background. My mother was a waitress, and my father was a construction worker. So mailman, that's a good job. Mm-hmm. So but I didn't continue with it. I went and did other things. And the bartender, I just wandered into a bar to hear some music. They had played rock and roll there. And a friend of mine worked in the kitchen. He said, "Hey, Dan, you want a job?" And I started the next day. It was just kind of accidentally. It's not like it was something I sought out. And I was actually working in the kitchen washing dishes, but I was the only one back there who was already 21 years of age, which you needed to be a bartender. And a bartender quit, and so, hey,
ta-da!
I'm going to be a bartender now. And here's a list of drinks to make. And
you had some interesting people there at your bar, because it's a bar at Silicon Valley. So
yeah, my job there was mostly the daytime bartender. I would work some of the nights when the rock and roll was playing, but I was primarily there. They served lunch there, so a lot of locals would have lunch, and we were open all afternoon, and then late afternoon sometimes we'd have happy hour, where people would get off work and come and have drinks. And one of the companies that found us and became regulars for happy hour on Fridays was Atari. So all of these people that worked from Atari, and there was another bar across the street that sometimes I would know the people there, and I dated one of the cocktail waitresses there. And for a little bit, not very long, but she ended up going on to marry Nolan Bushnell. So I think she did better financially.
Well, no, it's. I would love to talk about that area because it's, for me, always the most fascinating part. If somebody is finding his way to the things he will do in the future, and finding his calling or the bliss, and obviously you have found your bliss because you seem very content and very relaxed. Because you do what you like to do. So next stop was at some point Ames Research. So how did you make this transition from being a philosophical bartender to going to NASA?
Yeah, well, like I said, a bar went out of business, and I was unemployed,
Well,
and
okay.
but I was living in a house with some other people.
NASA would not be the next choice if a bar goes out of business.
Yeah, but I was living in a house with a few other people, and one of them was working at NASA Ames, and programming in Fortran, and he said, "You can do this stuff, Dan," and he encouraged me, and I went, and then I ended up enrolling and taking a couple of classes and getting an internship there as well. In a
Sounds
group
very easy.
It just happened, it's like it was all too easy. I feel really lucky. I've had, and there's so many layers of things that come with it. I was in the right place at the right time, and then there's all the privilege of being, a tall white male, makes it fairly easy. And there was hard work there, but I was really lucky in the opportunities to do the hard work got dropped in my path. And but it's funny, I worked at, the internship was for a year, and the contracting company that says NASA is a mixture of actual NASA employees and contractors, because to take somebody on as a full federal employee is a big obligation. So they have this layer of contractors that can fluctuate a little bit more. So I was working as a contractor, and then, one of the people at NASA wanted to hire me, and he came with a salary list. And I said, well, by the way, I didn't finish my bachelor's degree, and the government regulations are very kind of strict. So I had to, go down to what they paid the janitors and such. And so, well, I'm not going to take a pay cut to do that. So they paid the contracting company more to have me work there than they could have paid me directly. It's kind of funny. Yeah.
Strange, very strange world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
but yeah, I learned a lot there. And
I'm sorry, was that your first confrontation with a computer-generated image over there?
Oh yeah, and initially it wasn't images; it was interactive displays, and the images we made. We had a pen plotter. Eventually had two of them, and we would draw the wireframes on they're amazing to watch, the little pen moving around.
I vaguely remember them in school in the museum. Yeah.
And my first exposure to creating digital images, because at this time in computer graphics, the cutting edge of digital imagery was New York Institute of Technology at Catmull and people back in New York, and they were doing just amazing things. But and oddly enough, like these Evans and Sutherland interactive displays were made in Utah, and a lot of the early computer graphics came out of the University of Utah. And Ed Catmull was at the University of Utah, and some other people that are really instrumental came out of Utah, as well as Jim Clark, founder of Silicon Graphics and and on other things. But he had been to NYIT for a little bit. He came to start as a professor at Stanford, but he had bigger dreams of creating essentially Silicon Graphics. But he was looking for something he could do to make something on the side. So he set up this contract to port what was essentially NYIT's rendering software so that NASA could run it on their computers. And they didn't like NYIT was working on Unix computers with the C programming language and stuff. NASA was all these fuddy-duddy engineering, systems, and Fortran was their language. And I was, by this time, I was one of the, they assigned me to be Jim Clark's Fortran consultant. So I had to explain to him the horrible things he had to do to his C language to make it work in Fortran. And, some of which was pretty ugly. But, and he very quickly assigned some, once he got established at Stanford, he assigned some grad students to finish the project. They delivered it, and I did the rest of the work to package it. There was this program called Shade. And he had set it up set up the arrays so it could only do a 512 by 512 image. And it's like, oh, hey, we've got this film writer that can do 4K by 4K. Hey, just change that to 4K by 4K. So we'd make these big images. It was very simple shading, old-fashioned stuff, just a simple diffuse and specular. But we do full color images of airplane models with pressure from wind tunnel tests mapped to the surface as color. So scientific visualization. But it was essentially using a Fortran bastardization of NYT's renderer. Kind of a fun thing. Then it got put on a tape in the public domain, because everything NASA does has to since it's funded by the government, goes into the public domain.
Yeah.
But I don't know if anybody ever used that outside of the area I was.
Were you proud of your results?
I was pretty amazed at what we were able to do, but I had no idea, because it was just airplanes at the time, and I was trying to think of what else. I wasn't thinking of making animation at the time. I was just thinking, just make pictures, and with the data that I had, which was airplane models and wind tunnel stuff. But the techniques were really interesting, and it wasn't until I left NASA, where it was very much about the aeronautics, and the computer graphics was sort of a means to an end. I eventually left and was working for a company called Ramtech, which made computer displays. So at the time, you're going to make pictures with computers. You'd have something like a VAX mini computer or something with a small refrigerator-sized box next to it that controlled the images, and then a big color 19-inch bottle monitor next to it that would, maybe if you're lucky, does 640 by 480. And they made the box that would drive the display, and so I worked on a new one of those that was working in a little higher level language, and could do some stuff, and we were playing with things like I remember at the time started being more and more aware of SIGGRAPH, and Jim Blinn published a paper on bump mapping that uses an example putting the bumps on an orange. So I said, I'll implement that. So Jim Blinn was awesome, because he'd write in Fortran and you could just type in his code and it would work. It was just, so I implemented that. And so pretty soon Ramtech in their demos would have oranges on the screen with Ramtech embossed on the side. And I even made, they tended not to demo it, but I played around so it had interactive lighting. It had a little joystick you could move around and move the light around, and light them in real time, because of some trick I did.
If you like I do, if you read about it, which is not the same as to live it, it seems there's so much happening in a very short time, and there's somehow a spirit, a community spirit, that everybody gets inspired by everybody.
Yeah. And Pixar early on was a place like that. Well, NYT had been, but then once George Lucas, connected with Ed Catmull and started the Lucasfilm Computer Division, everybody in the business, like, wow, all these really cool people are gathering at this Lucas place up in Marin County, California. And they were very open about publishing whatever they did. They weren't really secretive. Ed had a really, open idea about, like, we're were working on this, and he wasn't very proprietary about it. He wanted, just to share the knowledge, and it was great. What's that?
Who did the little Death Star animation in Star Wars? Because I think without Star Wars, there wouldn't have been this Lucas experimental group thing, and
they did a few
and
things.
Without Tron, it wouldn't have been the way into the animation, I think.
Yeah, Tron was some different people. Yeah, the Lucasfilm Computer Division did some things like the Genesis effect from one of the Star Trek movies of the planet changing and growing, and the most famous of a lot of people call the first computer graphics character in a scene with a human was the stained glass man in Young Sherlock Holmes, was done by the Lucasfilm Computer Division, which would end up Pixar.
I just watched the film over and over again.
What's that?
I watched this film over and over again just to see those 10 seconds of this guy coming out of the window, and this pen shot, this wonderful shot when he's walking, and you see this little line that is just glass. So there's no guy in a costume. It's just the glass walking. That's and I thought, my goodness, well.
Yeah, that really showed the potential of what could happen. And they kept moving on. It's like, and I was watching this from afar down in that, because Lucasfilm was up in Marin County, which is the north end of the San Francisco Bay Area, and Silicon Valley was the South Bay. Nowadays, people include San Francisco and Silicon Valley, but back then, before so many software companies started basing up there, it was very much the south end of the bay, so it was all way up there. So I was watching it from afar, and I didn't think I could ever get up there. And then a guy who had worked as a field service engineer for Ramtech, going out and fixing these bits of hardware that Ramtech, so got a job as a field service engineer for Pixar, fixing their Pixar image computer, because when they spun off, it was because they had developed a piece of hardware for processing images that was too expensive for most people in film to even think about. And the only market they found for it was medical imaging. I mean, nowadays you get a scan and your doctor can bring up on their laptop and make slices and stuff, but you needed a special box, and Pixar made one to process those images back in the 80s. So and then it was used for some other things as well. But this field service engineer guy, they needed somebody to write a device driver to plug their Pixar image computer into a Cray supercomputer. And I had also done a bunch of device drivers at Ramtech, and this guy recommended me. So I went up and interviewed at Pixar the very first year. It's like they started early 86. This is like fall of 86. And it's like this, less than 100 people.
Just for clarification, Lucas is losing interest because it's not happening fast enough.
Its applications for film were pretty weak at the time. There were just a few special things, and the software they'd written for rendering, they became RenderMan, and Pixar owns it, but Industrial Light and Magic had, since it had spun off from Lucasfilm, it still had it, and they had a license to use it in case that, so they later were using it in Jurassic Park and Terminator and all of that stuff. But so I forget where I was.
No, I wanted to know where you were when Steve Jobs stepped in and says, I'm buying it.
I was still at Ramtech at the time. I was kind of out of that. But then I heard that the first I became aware of Pixar is that summer of 1986, after they had spun off. The first SIGGRAPH after that was in San Francisco. So it's local, which was a blessing and a curse, because I didn't have to worry about the company paying for me to go there. I could just drive up. But the other thing is they weren't going to pay for a hotel for me. So I had to drive up, 50 miles to go see it. But I went up there, and Ramtech was introducing some new device that I had written software for that had to go into proms to plug in the computer or into the board, to drive the graphics display. And I was up there the morning of the opening of the trade show part of the SIGGRAPH, and there's people behind a velvet rope waiting to get in, and I'm sitting there with a Ramtech machine all torn apart, plugging new proms into it and plugging it in and hoping it works. But then later I walked over there, from there over to, and Ramtech was an early SIGGRAPH member. And so they had worked their seniority up, so they were right at the front. And Pixar, being a new place, was further back in. And so I went walking back there, and I saw them, and they were demonstrating. I remember Malcolm Blanchard, one of their original Pixar people, was displaying the Pixar Animation computer, and they had for the bee from Andre and Wally B. So Wally B was the cursor on it, flapping his wings, moving around, and he was doing all of these image processing tricks on the Pixar Image computer, and it was like, wow, these guys are doing a lot more than what I'm doing. And it was only a few months later I got an interview there. But at the same time, I interviewed at Sun Microsystems, and Pixar was like maybe 100 people, maybe less. And Sun Microsystems was the hot Silicon Valley thing. So I thought I'd try that for a while. Plus it was the opposite end of the bay, and I wasn't excited about moving at the time. So I worked for Sun Microsystems for a couple of years. But the people I had interviewed at Pixar, the guy at Pixar was Mickey Mantle, which you probably don't know, but you say that to an American at a certain age, it's like famous baseball players. Like, no, not that Mickey Mantle. It was this is one who was from Utah, and his best buddy was working at Sun. So I interviewed with the two of them that were good friends, both from Utah, and the team stayed in. So the Sun graphics group would go up to San Francisco and go bowling with the Pixar graphics group. So I got to know some of the people. So after a couple of years at Sun, when the place had doubled in size both years I was there, but my analogy was, it was like there was a redshift on all the information between you and anybody else, because everybody's just moving apart. You work with somebody, you start to develop a relationship, and they move apart, and other people get hired in between, and it was just growing so fast, it was hard to feel connected. So I just called up Mickey and said, hey, do you have something of Pixar now? And a fellow had just left to go to Silicon Graphics. I said, yeah, actually I do. And so I was amazed at how easy that was. Because being a college dropout, I was going to work with all these people that had advanced degrees from prestigious universities and published all these papers that I'd read. And I was really excited. And it was just wonderful. It was like being accepted into some graduate school or something. I just learned so much from all these people. I've been working on these both at Sun and at Ramtech on trying to get little polygons onto the screen as fast as possible. So it's all about speed and plugging things into proms. And the last thing at Sun, it was like microcode for some fancy floating point chip to do 3D transformations really fast. And it was all about speed and stuff. And all of a sudden I got to Pixar, and it was, well, the speed's nice, but quality, we want to make beautiful images. And it was wonderful. I learned so much from so many people. And early on, there were, it was around 100 people, and be able to just pop into Ed's office, say, Ed, about those Catmull ROM splines. I was wondering, it was really just a wonderful place to be. But it was still about, they were still trying to sell the hardware. Mm-hmm. And I was working with the RenderMan group, which, made the rendering software that they use themselves. And the animation group was actually called the research group. They would do a short every year, like, Tin Toy and Knick Knack and stuff like that. But it was that they were researching. They weren't really making money doing it. And Steve Jobs was sinking money into it every year to keep it alive. And he finally said, the hardware's not making money. You got to figure out how to make money. So he actually sold off the hardware division, told the animation people, you got to find a way to make money, start making commercials or something. And the RenderMan people, he said, you got to sell this as a product. And there was only one other group that the CAPS group were doing animation, who already had a contract. They're the people who are writing compositing software for Disney, and the people that switched Disney from using multi-plane camera to doing digital compositing. Which the first scene that used that was the very end of Little Mermaid. Just the ship. They used the compositing, and then every film after that, all of a sudden the animators would still draw the pencil. They'd scan it in, and from then on, all the ink and paint and compositing was all happening in Pixar Image computers. With this CAPS, and they later ported it away from the Pixar Image computers to use general when the workstations caught up with the ability to process images. But I was off in the RenderMan group, and so they said, well, who do we sell this renderer to? And we sold it to other studios, but they tried to do Mac RenderMan and this application called Typistry, which was basically a way of doing flying logos. It would take in a font and extrude it and put treatments on it and render it on your Mac. So it was kind of strange working with those, but I was at the same time, a lot of studios were using it. And we had customer service people who would answer the phone about problems with the renderer, but some of the bigger studios had my phone number. So Disney would call me, or Metrolight was a big one at the time, was doing a lot of things in LA. Like in the first use of RenderMan by Disney was in Beauty and the Beast. They'd done some 3D stuff with some other competing software from Wavefront before that and stuff, but in the ballroom scene.
The chandelier.
Yeah, the chandelier and the whole marble ballroom is all done in RenderMan. And it was a new thing, and they weren't used to it. And at the time you had to write little snippets of software. So it was more programmers than artists that were doing it. So you didn't get somebody who had gone to art school who would end up shading, because they had to know how to program. And so the people were fairly technical, and they did all the colors, and it looked horrible. Just the bright colors, it was just garish and ugly. And I remember I was answering another problem for them. We had a problem. I was always chasing nans. It's one of the technical things in computers when you divide by 0 or something. It says, I don't know what the answer to this. It puts a special bit code in, which is called a nan, which I couldn't figure out the answer. You got a nan. But those they're horrible, because anything times a nan is another nan. And so you'd always get these white spots on the screen when you had nans. I was constantly kiboshing those somehow. But I was looking into something that for, but they just on the side said, and we're just these colors. It's all new for us, and it just looks so hard. They hate it. And I recommended that RenderMan had a feature at the time, an atmosphere shader that you could use. It would run on all the pixels, and it knew how far it was from the camera. And so you could do depth cueing, make something go gray, to make it look like there's, something in the atmosphere that hides things in the distance. And I said, well, why don't you just go in there and take that little gold color of your candlelight and shift all the colors closer to gold. And they did it, and it looked great. So I didn't get the credit, but I did get it. They gave me a prize. They sent me a big stuffed Tramp, the dog from Lady and the Tramp. It was funny. Thanks. But it was fun, talking to people about making real artistic endeavors better, these movies. And so that and then Pixar started doing commercials, and was involved with that. And I worked on a couple of commercials just as a break from the RenderMan group, just for help experience. Listerine, and that's the bottle that killed it, because Listerine used to come in a round bottle, and we made all these commercials with a round bottle. And then Listerine hired a new marketing person who had to make their mark, and they made that flat bottle, and it made all of the old Listerine commercials obsolete. Yep, it used to be round, but yeah. I thought I have to show it. The one I worked on the most was the one. There's one where he's supposed to be like General Patton. He's this general. He's got all these medals on his chest, And the metals were some of my first experiment in modeling. Back then, the predecessor to Maya was Alias. And so Maya, modeled in Alias some of those metals that say gingivitis, and stuff like that.
You seem to absorb that information and all this knowledge like mother milk. If you talk about it, it sounds so easy. You must have had some obstacles and some things you were afraid of, and there must have been doubt, and the philosophical bartender at some point would have to come in and say, "What are you doing?"
It was just each step at a time, and there were always people around. There's so many smart people at Pixar that I could ask, and modeling, there were a few people that knew how to model in Alias, and I said, "Oh, okay, I got to do this, and how do I get this?" And I remember Andrew Schmidt, one of the two Andrew Schmidts that worked at Pixar, was directing that one, and he was fairly technical. He's kind of back and forth between animation and the tech, so he gave me some tips, and took it from there. But I've been working with modeling, not in a modeling program, but way back in NASA, we had these models with curved surfaces of airplane models. And I wrote software that worked with, so I knew how they worked. I knew where the points had to go and what all the things had. So I knew underneath, what the numbers had to be to start off with, because I'd worked with them, for decades with under the hood in Fortran. I remember when I made the switch, I finally decided I wasn't going to work in the RenderMan group anymore. I was going to go to production. They had a technical director training that we would go through, and I went through this with a bunch of people in right after Toy Story. I was still in the RenderMan group during Toy Story, making fixes for them, but I switched before A Bug's Life and Geri's Game. But they gave us a task of modeling an Etch-a-Sketch as in the modeling part of this TV training. And there were, maybe 20 of us in there, 15, 20 people, and everybody's modeling an Etch-a-Sketch, and they all took such different approaches. It was just amazing to look at what everybody came up with. And mine, because I had worked with these parametric surfaces as just numbers for years, I knew exactly what they had to be. So I knew the minimum number to get and where to put them and all this stuff. So mine had very few points, and other people were just like, how does your mind work to even come up with those patches? And everybody just has a different approach. And when a problem is that complex, there's just so many solutions to it, and different people have, different approaches. And it was pretty amazing. But that class went on to be just a real.
Would you at some point say the first phase where this happened was from that point to that point, and there was some kind of second phase, and nowadays we are in the whatever generation we are now? Was there some milestone that changed the game in a way that you said, okay, now we are in a different ball game?
There's a few things that changed. So I see it as a little more gradual than one thing. My perspective is from inside Pixar, where we used mostly our own software. It's like we early on went to Alias. Before Alias, some of those shorts made in the 80s, Eben Osby was typing in the numbers in a text editor, to come out. And then they had for like Tintoy, the baby, they did a sculpture. They were kind of digitizing it in, but doing all this manual stuff to put it together. So they didn't have something like Maya to work with. And then Alias came along. It was kind of close, but it was all NURBS and rectangles, and it was kind of primitive in a way. But it kind of got you there. And but for outside of Pixar, probably one of the revolutionary things was Maya coming out, because it was an integrated package that could do awesome modeling and the whole pipeline. So it was there, because before that, when Toy Story came out, there were 3 studios in the States that had written all their own software, that had done a bunch of commercials that could do this. Pacific Data Images, PDI, Blue Sky, and Pixar. And they were 3 here. I mean, in fact, these 3 are the ones that made the jump to movies, though, doing feature films. And so, but there were 3 peers. I mean, I remember PDI and Pixar used to have SIGGRAPH parties together. There's like, oh, the PDI Pixar. Later on, we went to, it turned into DreamWorks and Disney, and it was like, like more competitive. But it was just all
a little bit, just a little bit.
Yeah, but it's Pixar had a little bit of a head start because we had the relationship with Disney because of the CAPS compositing software. We were already involved with them deeply, and so when they came with the Toy Story project, we had some resources. Plus, we had Steve Jobs negotiating our deal. So PDI ended up having to sell their studio to DreamWorks to make a film. Blue Sky had to sell their studio to Fox to make a film. Steve Jobs negotiated 50-50 co-branding and a 3-picture deal. And it was a rocky road after that, but it was like by the time we did sell to Disney, it was after a whole series of successful films, and it got sold to Disney for way more than it would have before Toy Story. So we're just lucky that way, and it's like, it's not because we were better, it's like these were our peers, and they ended up doing great work. But it's like, from a business standpoint, it's like, wow, Steve Jobs was a good negotiator.
Yeah, absolutely. I would, of course, before I ask you, you met him, and I would like to know your opinion about him. I know him as Michael Fassbender from the Aaron Sorkin film, so you know him in flesh. But I have to throw in one question from our audience. Okay. Christian Griese wrote, right now there seems to be a huge paradigm shift in terms of rendering, with GPU renderers shooting from the ground, new formats coming up in like USD. Also a lot of renderers and also softwares like Houdini implement those Uber shaders, which are very complex on the inside and can handle the specific variety of looks, from metals to glossy materials, coating, subsurface scattering, and such. I started in the time when you could and would still script a lot of shaders like Blinn, LaFortune, and such. It seems that modern pipelines are not really built for that. Does the industry sacrifice flexibility and also quality in order to fit into fast and faster pipelines? And is the old school way dead? I'm proud that I most of the time was right with the pronunciation, but anyway, do you have any answers to that?
Yeah, it's a complex question, but I think at Pixar we still do, and in fact, the role I'm doing right now, I'm working with for the studio, not on the individual films, doing shading tools, and so we're trying to keep a balance between those shaders that, here's the shader that does everything, and just feed in a texture map for all of the controls, to something Pixar's always been a bit more procedural, and a bit of program in there. And we're doing we have a tool that creates a shading network of smaller nodes, and it's always kind of we have a lot of really small ones, just like, multiply these 2 floats together, but you don't want to build an entire shading network out of things that small. Sometimes you need that for glue between things, but we try to find a right size. And I've been doing some special purpose ones, for like, our eyeballs need to do this special thing. It's like, we'll wrap that up into a general purpose piece that you could use in different ways. So if you write one big eyeball shader, and then the next show wants a subtly different look, they'll throw it away and do another eyeball shader. And we're trying to get to the point where we have tools where you can do different things. Like, we have a show coming up that has very stylized irises and no pupils, and which is very anime look, and it's they need some things to be a little different. So I'm helping them craft tools to get the kind of stylized look they want. So but I know what you mean, that there's always this tension between throwing everything into one big thing, which is very powerful but also can be limiting when you want to just do something out of the path. And and Pixar is, with the RenderMan render, has gone through a number of major changes. When I worked on it, it was still, kind of raster, it was slapping polygons on a screen and rasterizing. It's now RIS Path Tracer, which is doing the full path tracing. And the next iteration that they're working on is going to integrate with GPU, so you can run on the GPU or the CPU and use really fast parallelism. And so it's getting to simple shading as interactive speeds, and more complex shading is still pretty amazing. But doing it without changing the shading paradigm. It's using the same kind of complex network. And we had our own shading language for the RenderMan render for the longest time, but we switched at some point with going to the path tracer to an open shading language put together by Larry Gritz, who used to work at Pixar. But now it's available in a number of renderers. But it's actually pretty good. It does, you write a general purpose network, but it kind of feeds it into an optimizer on the way in, and it comes out pretty good. Very powerful language. And there's always a tension, but Pixar's taking the more as a studio is taking the more general approach of having giving power to the shading people to craft these networks in different ways, to customize them for the particular use. And even within Pixar, it's easy to see, like, oh, this is a network done by the character shaders. Oh, this is a network done by the environment shaders. So the shader on a building is organized very differently than the shader on the skin or something, just because of the needs.
If you tell something like that to a storyteller, are they running away screaming, or are they listening to you?
Who's that? No, I'm sorry.
If you are telling that to a storyteller who comes to you with a certain story, I want to have that in my show and this feature, and you start to come up with the technical, mathematical side of making an animated, computer-generated image. How is the communication between you as a technical director and, let's say very positively, a non-technical person, which is almost every time working in the story department?
Yeah, and a lot of our directors come out of story, and they're in charge of the visuals as well. They'll have production designers and art directors working with them, but there's a varying amount of technical expertise in those. It's like Ratatouille was a lot of fun because the shading art director that I worked with was very technical, and we had a really good communication. But sometimes, the people calling these looks, and they're just coming up with these looks out of the blue. But Pixar's culture is very much story driven, and the priorities is like, we try and figure out a way to make it work. Sometimes there have to be compromises, but sometimes the compromises are new opportunities. And a lot of it's interesting to see. And I can't talk about some of the ones coming up, but there's some of the feature films that are coming down the pipe from Pixar. Is there's like, make a technical person go, oh my, I remember back on A Bug's Life, Bill Reeves, who's been still a Pixar, started way before me. He was the supervising technical director, and so somebody put up a cartoon on his door that was like, what John Lasseter says and what Bill hears, and it had John Lasseter saying things, and it was just all these dashes, except it would say water, and the fire, rain, just like, and I was like, oh no, I have to do. But Pixar's attitude is very can do, and it's like, first, the technical people's like, oh my god, that sounds hard, but you find a way. And I was lucky on La Luna in that Enrico didn't want anything, really wacky. We were able to make it all out of tools that were lying on the shelf after Toy Story 3 was done, when didn't have to craft too much new stuff. But every show has its challenges.
I have to throw in Sarah's question because you already mentioned the film. What is your favorite film that you worked on, and which film has the greatest development while working on the film? Skip the second part. I would say let's stick to the first part because I know the film you like most, you worked on, and I don't. Please, what is the? Let's stick to Sarah's question. What is your favorite film that you worked on?
Yeah, it varies a lot, but it's like I did grab a T-shirt out of the drawer today. It depends on my role on it, and just Ratatouille, I'm really proud of. I really loved it. I'd worked with Jan before on Geri's game, and then it switched over to Brad, and Brad was amazing to work with. And I had in our tool, it was like we usually break up shading into, there's a group of shaders in the character department, a group of shaders in the sets department, but occasionally we merge them back together, like we did on Incredibles. Rick Sayre was that role. We have one coming up with it's doing it again. But on Ratatouille, I was the shading supervisor, so I was in charge of both the technical side of both characters and sets. And we had a little group. Belinda van Valkenburg was wonderful. She was, background as a digital painter, but she was very tech, and we had a great communication. And it was just a wonderful department. It had really great people working for us, and we got to build this world. And we got a good start on it before Brad even came on. So we had our momentum, and Harley Jessup is the production designer. We got it. In fact, Belinda had a better memory for what Harley said than Harley did, and we all got on the same page with the artistic look, and it was really, it was fun working with all these people, helping keep it in the realm of the Ratatouille look, and made a beautiful film. It was my favorite experience, and I got to be in the room when Brad, Bird would go off on his. My favorite was his rant when Jan had had all of the rats walking on two legs, and which is fine for a film about rats, but this was a film about the rats and the humans. And Brad Bird, they had already rigged them all, so all the rats were done and rigged as bipeds. Mm-hmm. And Remy needed to walk on two legs at some time, but Brad came and said they got to walk on all fours, and it's like the rant he went into in a Pixar screening room about this. I felt like I should have got some college credit for it, or film school or something. It was just he was so knowledgeable, and he could articulate it so well, exactly why the story needed these rats to be down on all fours, and Remy would stand out and be the one that's approaching the human world. It was just a wonderful thing, and it worked really well. And it just, the opportunity to be involved in things like that was just wonderful. And so as a feature film, there's others that I really loved working on Monsters, Inc. It was one of my favorite. On Incredibles was fun to work on, but I had a very different role. I was working as my credit there is the illumination engineer. I was kind of like making tools for the lighting team rather than the shading, and it just, there's a lot of ones that I had fun on, but the Ratatouille was the most satisfying experience, and I felt like I had the most to do with what ended up on screen of any of the features. And then after that, I got the opportunity to do La Luna, and for the short like that one, I felt even more connected to, and really, so it's between those two, Ratatouille and La Luna, as far as the favorite. But
I have to ask about the bread in Ratatouille, because food never looked so delicious, and Paris looked never so attractive as in Ratatouille. And you once said that bread was the hardest thing to do. Why that?
One of my favorite things. I gave a talk at a animation festival in Canterbury, UK, and a fellow there from DreamWorks was there, an old PDI guy, Cassidy Curtis, wonderful guy. We hadn't met before. We started talking, and I found out I worked on Ratatouille, and he just looked and said, "The bread," and it's like, because it's the bread is something like, oh yeah, if you're not technically, you're like, oh, it's bread. It looks good, and it looks pretty, but it's like most of the stuff you see in the computer graphics film is a surface, so I can make a surface look like wood or stone or whatever, but bread, you can make the crust pretty easily, but the torn bread, and there's all these holes, and finding out where the surface is and everything was really, really difficult. And I was lucky. I had a great team, but in particular, my technical kind of secret weapon was Emily Thompson, who had started on Finding Nemo and done a lot of great work there. But kind of mentored her a bit, and she came on the team, and she took on all of the really hard technical problems, and the bread was one of them, and had this kind of ray marching thing going on that would find where the bread was. And it's, I mean, you can do better, but at the time it was pretty amazing that most people just saw it and it's like, oh, it's bread. And that's sometimes the frustrating thing with computer graphics. When you have something really difficult, if you do your job well, nobody notices. Except another technical person who comes and says, the bread. She handled that one, and she also helped us with the subsurface scattering on the skin, because we hadn't done that very well before, and there were some competing ideas to use some cheaper stuff that we'd used on Finding Nemo, which was good for fish and the kind of colors that were there, but it wasn't working for us for human skin. And we had a great technical guy in the research department had some ideas about it, but hardly anybody, had to send Emily off to talk to him to understand what he was trying to do and translate it into something we could use, and it worked out great.
Short question to Andrew. Do we have some overtime? Please?
Oh, it's been an hour already?
Yeah, you guys can go as long as you want.
Okay. Come in with the other questions. No.
I realize it's been so long.
Andrew. I'm so sorry to the audience, but you are already sending in more questions. Great. I know La Luna is your favorite short because the role you played in La Luna, and before I start praising this film, because that's when we met. My gold standard in animation still is, because I saw it first, and it was magical to see it, even it was on television, very old television, by the way, but color. I saw The Old Mill by Walt Disney, an old silly symphony. Yeah. No real story, just an atmospheric piece of what happens in the night at an old mill when there's a lightning storm. Yeah. It's a 8-minute thing, got an Academy Award, is famous for first use of the multiplane camera and such stuff. And long story short, it was simply magical to see that. There's no dialogue, there's no story. There are plenty of characters, but none is in a central role. And still, this is a magical film. La Luna came close. There are some films that are very, very funny, and there's some films that are very technical, but La Luna had atmosphere, grace, and beauty and tenderness, and that was something very rare. And I love this film, and of course, I love the film also because you came to Stuttgart to FMX, and I think that's the thing where we met. But how did you came in touch with La Luna? How did you get in touch with the? Perhaps you could go into detail what the shorts are for Pixar, because Disney is now coming up with a new short film in a long, long while, but at Pixar there's still this tradition of doing shorts, starting with the early days where they tried to sell RenderMan through the shorts, but nowadays they still do it. So what's the role of short films, and how did you came attached to La Luna?
Well, yeah, like I said, when I started at Pixar, I was in the rendering group. So I'd see the animation group and what they were doing. And then they stopped it while they were making the commercials. And my first production job after leaving the RenderMan group was Geri's Game, which was made in the gap between Toy Story and A Bug's Life. So I'm listed there as shading. There a couple of people shaded a couple of things, but I also modeled a few things. So we just kind of simplified the credits down. But that was fun to it's like with the shorts, like you don't want to take very long. They try to make the credits as brief as possible, so they simplify them. But I lit a shot, I modeled the chess set, I did a lot of different things, and that was a lot of fun to work on. But yeah, La Luna was different because I was on it. I was in charge of all the technical side of it, and which included feeding things for the animators, and just realizing it, just making sure it matched Enrico's vision. So I had to be on board with what Enrico's vision was and what he was seeing, and it was yeah, and it's all Enrico. It's like I helped make Enrico's vision, but it's like Enrico's why that film has such a heart, and such.
You mean the director of the upcoming Pixar film?
Yeah, Luca is coming out this month on Disney Plus near you, and it's beautiful. It's got a similar aesthetic in some ways. It feels very much Enrico is very much a Miyazaki fan, and you can see the influence in some of the beautiful scenery. And but it's just it's a fun film, really sweet. Can't wait for it to hit the streets. But that, and it's like La Luna was very much Enrico's thing, and I was just like his technical guy to make it happen, and it was a lot of fun.
There must have been at some point a picture on your door. What is Enrico saying, and what are you thinking? Oh my goodness! What? Zero gravity, stars, comets.
It was
whatever, and
it was
dialogue.
Yeah, no, it was fun to realize all that. I got it when they put out it internally at Pixar when something like that started, so people can apply for the position. And I interviewed with Enrico and some people about it, and I they mentioned like it depends on the short. It's like I actually talked to them about a Lava that came out a bit later, about maybe getting a role there. They went with an effects specialist as the supervising technical director on Lava, because it was much more there's lava and underwater and all of this stuff. Whereas what Enrico's main concern was getting the look, the look of things. So he went with somebody who was a shading expert. And I guess he liked, from my reputation coming out of Ratatouille, he thought, and hopefully I got the look he wanted.
Pretty sure.
And it was fun because we could find tricks to do things. Luckily, none of the like there were some things that were going to be hard, like the rope, like doing the effects for the rope that's on the anchor and all of that stuff was looking really hard. But then talked to an effects CD who had worked on, because Toy Story 3 was finishing up as we were doing, and there's a whole thing with Buzz and this piece of yarn, and all of that, and it's like, oh, that's exactly the technical thing we need. So we were able to just grab that and just reshade it as rope instead of yarn, and all of the controls were there that we needed for the rope to happen. And we were just really lucky that there was something laying around in the toolkit. The hardest thing was one of my other things, just from a technical thing. It's like one time Rodrigo came to me, the animator, a supervising animator, and said, "Can we make the oar a character?" And it's like inside Pixar is like the build structure for sets and props and characters are very different because the characters need all the rigging and stuff. And they've since made them a lot closer, but there's still some difference. And at the time, the only way to get inverse kinematics was to make something a character, because that would that had the infrastructure. But it was a big pain. It's like it's going to take me all day to move this asset from being this rigid ore to being a character to be able to do IK. But like I said, I'd been illumination engineer on Incredibles, and I said, or lock hand. This is the same mathematical problem as a from to light. Light comes from here, points it there. And so we had this, and at the time, our tools had this procedural language called Muddle that implemented most things. And I said, so I just stole the Muddle out of the lights for from to, and they had this generalized piece of this model called a pivot, where you could attach something to a pivot and move the pivot around and things would track. I made a 2-point pivot that had a from to, and it's like the Muddle language was so powerful, I was able to do this in less than a half hour. And so after being like, oh no, how are we going to do this, I walked over to Rodrigo's office and said, hey, try this. And he did it, and he's like, I think I'm going to cry, because of all the times that he could have used that, but they had never asked somebody who had the right combination of hey, there's this thing over there in the lights that we can use for the ore. But so we didn't have to make the ore a character. It was a lot easier. It didn't have a speaking role anyway.
Niels is asking a question which is at the right point, at the right time. How long do you generally have to come up with a solution for a particular request, and do tend to go through a bunch of very different approaches before settling on one? I think this is differently handled on a feature and on a short film, I could imagine.
Yeah, short films definitely have a more compressed time schedule. Mm-hmm. And also, like La Luna, I was on for a year, and animators came on and off, lighters came on and off, and effects people came on and off. So there, and the modelers, and so I was kind of the glue in between. So I had to solve a problem, but there's nobody of that specialty there. I'd have to figure out how to do it. So fixing up the water animation and fixing up some of the rope, and things like that. But on a feature, it depends on when it comes up too, because very often a lot of your technical problems come up, fairly early in the story, and like, oh, we're going to have to do this thing. We have to create, the mind world for Inside Out, or you have to have something special for the soul world, and soul that they're really hard problems. You can try different things, and it's part of the development process. If you have something that's really key to the look that you've thought about ahead of time, it's just when you come. The hard thing is when you come up, and you're moving along, and you have these technical things, and all of a sudden they meet each other, and you have to, how do we do that with this? And then there's often a little more seat of the pants, like, well, how do we do that? We didn't. If we had thought about this ahead of time, we could have, done something. But we're in the middle of it now. How do we fix this? And put out a special channel and have the lighters fix it in compositing or something like that. So yeah, it really varies with situation, when it comes up and in what kind of show it comes up in.
But so far, you never fail to come up with a solution.
Somehow pixels made it onto the screen every time, and sometimes, they're not the pixels that were originally intended. And sometimes they're changed for odd reasons, like Monsters, Inc. came out after 9/11. And, all of a sudden they're looking at, wow, the sushi restaurant blowing up is kind of scary right now.
But on the other hand,
and they've done all of this work to make this realistic kind of explosion. And it's like, we don't want to make people think about that in the kids movie. So they came up with this weird kind of, sci-fi, thing, or energy field thing to happen, and switched it out, and it was fine, but a lot of times you have to adapt like that. It's like something can be wrong for a reason that you couldn't have thought of ahead of time.
Yasmin is asking, do you still enjoy watching animated films, or do you catch yourself analyzing the technical details at all the time? And especially if you worked on such a film, are there some moments where you avert your eyes because you are not so fond of the solution?
Well, I tend to be fairly understanding. I do notice, when something's like, oh yeah, I would have fixed that, but it's I'm pretty open. I know everybody has different, environments and stuff. And I kind of judge it by the kind of content it is. Like, not everybody has Pixar's budget. I mean, I feel like, I have no business looking down my nose at anybody. I spent a year on 7 minutes of La Luna. How many people can afford that? For, like all these people spending a year for 7 minutes of animation. So I'm under. So it is. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes I'll wince. It's like, oh, I would have done another iteration on that or used a different thing. But I'm not overly judgmental about it. I appreciate the work people do, and I like watching animation. And it's more the story, that it tells than the technical details. Yeah, I just recently watched the last one I watched was the Mitchells versus the Machines, and I loved it. Very different. They're doing a lot of the different techniques and stuff that. So it's an interesting film, but I love the story. I love the heart in it.
Yeah, there are some. It was like Spider-Verse, that they took some very surprising turns, which there was a time when I have to say when DreamWorks, Blue Sky, and Disney looked almost the same, and they had all this this comedy tone in it, and then if you imagine that, then I'm like Anton Ego in Ratatouille. I want to be surprised. Come up with something new, and this is a fantastic search for eye candy. It's amazing, and sometimes somebody like Mike Rianda who comes up with Mitchell's versus the Machines that's exactly that, turning and twitching all the time in different directions you would never have thought of. I have a question here from. Where is it? From Marcus, who actually worked at Pixar. And what shading problems do you think are still not sufficiently solved? Or do you think the shift to NPR stylized looks is the indication that all equations have been solved? Something Ed Catmull once said to me when I met him in Switzerland at this Zurich Pixar lab, and he said everything is now solvable. And I thought, no, I don't think so. But anyway, what do you think about
like the other Pixar founder, Alvy Ray Smith, had a good one. He's like, yeah, we're trying for photorealistic, but not necessarily this reality. Like realistic in some universe that we've thought up. Yeah, I don't know. All the equations of I think I've gotten to the point. I'm kind of old fogey now in a way, and sometimes when I see things going hyper real, and we're solving these finer and finer problems, and it's like it's great work. I really appreciate it, but I step back and it's like, oh, I guess I've gotten weary of chasing fine details of reality. No, it scatters this much, not that much, like really fine things. And I love the stuff with non-photorealistic rendering where it's just like, let's do something that's driven by our imagination and what we want to see, less by just following physics. Physics is interesting, and I think it all should be based in physics, but occasionally you want to do like, well, it's physics except it does this, where you can choose to. So I appreciate the layering of like the total the ability to bounce the photons around the way they would bounce around, but then the way to like, oh, there needs to be some color here because it tells my story. So I don't think that everything's solved yet by any means, because it's just amazing what the story people keep coming up with.
I had this moment when I saw Gemini Man, and I thought his digital Will Smith. I didn't see the point anymore. I thought, let a younger actor play that. It's not. There's no reason why he should play it as an older man to play this young role. And I think I was able to see where the CGI started and the human flesh ended, and I wasn't so convinced that was a good idea to do. But anyway, I would like to go to another question. What was the special look of Ratatouille? Asks Sonia. The sepia tone, cooking pot surfaces, deep black shadows, water scenes, a big challenge in the technical field, and how? And the answer, of course, yes, it was, and why?
Yeah, there were a number of things about the look. One is that nothing was supposed to be perfect. It's like we went to a lot of work to make the tiles on the kitchen floor not perfectly parallel or straight, and everything had got knocked around a little bit. So try to make everything imperfect, because it's one of the things you can do in computer graphics is make perfect stuff. And we were trying to give everything just a little bit of character, and it went way through it. So everything was a little, just a little off, a little not quite there. And then just the textures, just getting we had a lot of textures we would use that were like, a paint roller on a wall and things like that we just use over and over again to get some complex texture into things. So nothing was that smooth. And I mean, obviously you didn't know paint roller on the pots and pans, but there you try and get like, oh, how is the scratching on it, and when they wash it and everything. Yeah,
totally convincing for me, because after that I wanted to have some pots like that used in that way.
The hardest thing was the food, and we because like before that we'd never made food that you wanted to eat. If you watch the family dinner in The Incredibles, it's one of my favorite scenes. It's wonderful, but you don't want to eat that steak that Bob's trying to cut. It just has to be a little lump there for the story. In Ratatouille, you had to look at the food and say, I would eat that. And that was a whole new problem. And we were really worried about it going in, and it wasn't the first thing we tackled, but we were really lucky to get a new hire out of interesting enough, Blue Sky back then. Painter Athena Xenakis was a very talented painter, plus got a good technical side. And we had put together some of the technical tools like the subsurface scattering we'd done for the human skin and things like that. We were able to leverage a bunch of those things together, and she was able to dial it and nailed it. And she established the look of the food, and it was going really well. And then one thing is like internal Pixar politics. It's like, you can't poach people from another show that's going on unless you make them a lead. And then Wally came along and said, oh, we're going to make Athena a lead. And so like, oh, we're not done with the food yet. But then we had another woman who had started as an intern. And I kept having to ask her, can you extend her? Can you extend her? I need, and Sarah Fowler. And she just stepped right into Athena's, what Athena had set up. And she made some, carried it through beautifully. From something she started an intern and ended up operating at the highest level as a shader. It was wonderful. So yeah, but it's I think we succeed. The bread obviously was a hard thing, but that was more the look thread than the making it look appetizing. And stuff like the ratatouille, you had to look like you would eat that. And
what problem would you like to tackle if you are given the chance to choose? Is there for the future what frontiers do you see that at Catmull didn't see at that point in Zurich?
It's kind of interesting.
Where's the eye candy from tomorrow?
I'm in a position now where I'm helping people. They come to me with problems and I help solve them, and I'm fine with. I like what I'm doing, and it's kind of gotten into this routine. The thing that makes me excited now is closer to story. And I'm never going to direct a film at Pixar or anything like that, but I'm getting my creative needs are be kind of extend outside the solving the technical problems. I still like that and still do it, and I appreciate helping. I love helping people. So it's so much fun to like, oh, we need this special thing that does this, and you do it and say, oh, and I add these special bells and whistles for you, and they love it and they use it. I just love that, and it's the most rewarding thing for me is helping with people. But outside of that, I'm trying to write a story or something like that myself, and I've recently kind of given up on the idea of trying to make somebody make a film, so I'm just writing the story.
Yes, please. And as I said in our talk before the talk, you need to write down what we have spoken about, because I think somebody like you has a certain obligation to write it down, because you lived through an immense time, and then you met very interesting people. And I said before, I would have loved to be there too, and I envy you extremely to have been there at that time. So I'm coming back to the question that wasn't answered yet. Steve Jobs.
Oh yeah,
Steve Jobs, and please add, what was the most interesting character you met on your journey so far?
A lot of interesting characters. But yeah, Steve
you are
Jobs,
allowed to talk about. Yes, sorry.
Yeah. When I started at Pixar, of course, Steve Jobs owned it pretty much outright. I mean, and he was sank money in it every year to keep it going, and would stop by every once in a while, maybe once a month or so, and talk. And so it's all big picture. He wasn't day to day. He still had his day job at Next Computer, and he, was a small enough company that he knew who I was. I don't think he knew my name, but I remember we were doing some work with Next. They supported some interactive version of the RenderMan standard, and some of us from the RenderMan group were down at Next Computer one day in this meeting, and we're doing the meeting and taking a break, going across the hall to the bathroom, and who do we bump into? It's Steve Jobs. And so I know he knows who I was, because he looked at me and said, "Oh, the Pixar guys," So I was just one of the Pixar guys to him. But I appreciated him. We had a good part of him as opposed to Apple, because he always had a day job. We were a little worried when it looked like Next might not be able to make it before he jumped to Apple. It's like, oh, what if he's full time here? He might, but he knew that he didn't know everything about filmmaking. Okay. And so it was good. He trusted people, and to do that, and it was much more hands-on at Apple, I'm sure. And the story, and in fact, when the biography came out, that was fairly critical. Some of the people at Pixar that had worked directly with him said, "Well, yeah, that guy called me up, but I didn't talk to him for very long." Because the people that were close to him were kind of protective of him, and they weren't sure, like, oh, well, what are you where are you going with this? Whereas the people that had an axe to grind with Steve Jobs are happy to talk, for hours. So it's not that anything wasn't true, but it's just like have a little more balanced view, that there was good and there was bad, but I appreciate working for him. He had his vision, he cared about the vision more than the money. and
Yeah.
had faith that the money would follow. And so far, he was always right.
And another character you are very fond of, besides Jobs?
Oh, well, Ed Catmull was wonderful to work for. It's interesting. It was a little sad his last few years there, because after this with Disney, he was in charge of Disney's animation studio and ours, and so he split his time and wasn't as involved. So he's a little less in touch. But the early days, especially, you could just walk into his office, say hi, Ed, and he was very. And it is famously always said he wanted to hire people smarter than he was, which doesn't necessarily mean I don't think I was necessarily smarter than he was, but he looked for what, he was always looking for what you knew that he didn't. He wasn't like there to dictate to you everything because he was in control. He respected other people, really, and he was just a wonderful man to work for.
So we have now done 90 minutes, way over time, and I would like to. Yes, please. I would like to go on, but I would like to wrap it up with a last question, because we have some people from the universities here in Germany in the chat, and I would dare to ask you for some inspiring words why to stay in this business. And as you have described, it has been quite a journey for you, with some wonderful moments, and I can imagine some tough moments too. What would you say to an aspiring young student who wants to go into this business?
It's interesting because I've talked to places before where people have asked me, young people have asked about how do I get a job at Pixar, and I said, I can tell them. It's like, I think the door I got in has been locked for a while, but there's other paths there. But I say, do you really want to work at Pixar? Because Pixar is already Pixar. Don't you want to work at the next one? And that's what I feel. I just stumbled on a place that just happened. And it's like you don't realize it's a golden age until the golden age is over, kind of thing. But those early days at Pixar were just wonderful, and it's an amazing place to be. And Pixar is still a great place to work, and it's still, but it's more of a machine now, where you find your point in it and you contribute to it, which is great. But is that what you want, or do you want to, see something else? And it's see something new. And I love seeing things out of new, animation studios with different ideas and different ways of doing things. It's harder because you have, fewer resources. Pixar has gotten to the point where, we are trying to be leaner and stuff as we do more streaming and stuff like that. But still, Pixar has budgets that would embarrass a lot of studios. And so, but there's nothing wrong with that. Finding inventive ways around that to deliver compelling images and compelling stories is always worth it, I think. And finding ways to do it without Pixar's resources is even more interesting of a challenge. Yeah. But it is wonderful working at a place like Pixar. I've always said that I love working at Pixar because you can do your best work. And it's such a place where it's held up all around by the best work of all these other people. And so I remember interviewing people out of the effects industry who were, looking to come to Pixar, and them saying, what they were tired of, they said, oh, my shot's really cool, but the movie's crap. It's because it's like, effects, you're not in control of the story. They come to you and say, oh, we need this thing to happen, and you can do something really beautiful, but then it's whatever story mad slasher story they came up with. Whereas at Pixar, it's just, I really appreciate that it starts from the story, coming up with a story and developing the story, giving it a lot of time to to refine it, and they're always going for the heart. They know when the story's working when they feel it, not when it's checking some boxes. It's about, because any kind of artistic endeavor is aimed at human emotions, and keeping that in perspective, that it's more about the emotions. And eye candy is great if it does something, but if it's just gratuitous eye candy, it's like, well, it's just a distraction. It needs to be in service of something. And
so in the end,
anything you find that follows that heart, to me, is a good choice.
Yeah, the moment that got me in La Luna is the moment when the young boy finally found his way to put up his cap his way. And
cap around
yeah,
backwards.
indeed, and that meant that he found his voice and would have from this way on, it will be a great life. That was a great moment, because it was just a little moment, how to put up a cap, and I thought, tears and everything. It was amazing. As amazing as you are, and as amazing this talk has been for me. I do not know about the public out there. Are still somebody there? Yes, a few people are still there. Thank you so much for your time, Daniel. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure talking to you.
I will do it again when we're allowed to speak about other themes. Well, it's an amazing life, and if you do not write that book about how animation became what it was from your point of view, I would be very, very angry. Until then, I will be absolutely always in your debt, because you did this, and you didn't, like Andrew, you facilitated in a way that was very nice. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you,
Okay.
Johannes, for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
I hope I see the others soon, and we come up with another talk at some point. And until then, have a great evening, morning, night, wherever you are at the moment. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Bye-bye.